Well, at HRNK as executive director, I run the daily operations of the organization. I coordinate our publications. I have a very good team in place. Of course, this is all about teamwork. I coordinate outreach efforts. So it's a matter of doing our documentation, working on our documentation work, but also it's a matter of engaging in good, solid outreach. I have to supervise all of these aspects. Once again, I have a great team in place, young, capable. Personally, the reason why I gained this interest in North Korean human rights is that I was born and raised in communist Romania, which was the one communist country in Eastern Europe that was closest to North Korea, as Nicolae Ceausescu and Kim Il-sung were very close friends. I took a few exams for scholarships overseas and became the first Romanian ever to study in South Korea on a South Korean government scholarship, 1 year of language training, BA, MA from Seoul National University. I worked in media broadcasting for a few years. I went to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts. And then I relocated with my family to Washington, D.C. in 2002. I worked in international development for 6 years. I worked with Korea Economic Institute for 3 years. And then since 2011, since early July 2011, I have been executive director of the U.S. Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, HRNK.
So you decide to become a human rights activist in the USA or from when you were in Korea as a student abroad?
Since I was in Korea, so here's the story. This is a very personal issue to me. I was born and raised in the one Eastern European country that was closest to Kim Il-sung's North Korea. Practically, Ceausescu wanted to turn Romania into the North Korea of Eastern Europe. And then I spent 10 years on a divided Korean peninsula while studying, working, living in South Korea. Initially, I thought, like many others, that North Korea would collapse because communism had collapsed in so many other places, in Eastern Europe in particular. But then during the days of the Great Famine, the days of the Konane Hengun, I came to the realization that this was an entirely different situation. And that's when I acquired this interest in North Korean human rights. So that would have been about, well, almost 30 years ago.
I understand that you were very young on the Ceausescu regime in Romania. How young were you at that time?
Well, not that young. I was 19 years old and a first-year student at Bucharest University, majoring in English language and literature. I was on the streets. I was on the streets in December 1989 when the regime fell. More than 1,000 of my peers, members of the same generation, died in the streets. So I was old enough to be part of that.
Okay. You said that you coordinated some 20 or so HRNK publications addressing North Korea's human rights situation and the ridiculous system of its regime. Just briefly tell us about, what about typical examples of human rights abuses to be defined as crimes against humanity being committed still in North Korea.
North Korea is a party to multiple international instruments, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as a UN member state, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Women's Convention, the Children's Convention, the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. North Korea has its own constitution that includes, amazingly, human rights as well, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and yet each and every human right is violated in North Korea. Of course, the worst human rights violations happen at North Korea's detention facilities. North Korea's Kwalliso political prison camps, North Korea's Kyohaso re-education through labor camps, and also at short-term detention facilities. We actually had a study we did with the International Bar Association, a law firm, Debevoise Plimpton, on short-term detention facilities, the Chikyoso short-term police detention facilities, the Nodong Talyonde mobile labor brigades. If they're short-term, it doesn't mean that violations do not happen there. Egregious human rights violations, especially perpetrated against women, forcibly repatriated from China, happen at these facilities. Under Kim Jong-un, through satellite imagery analysis and North Korean escapee testimony, we have identified several trends. Number one, some detention facilities that were close to the border with China have been shut down and the detainees were moved inland. So detention facilities inland have expanded. Camp 25 is one such example. Second, women have taken the brunt of human rights abuse. Why? Because during and after the arduous march, the Konanehenggun, the Great Famine, women have assumed primary responsibility for the survival of their families. So they're the ones who go to the Changmadang open market, or the Nongminshijang, the farmers market, or the Amshijang, even the black market. They're the main market agents. They're the ones who are arrested and punished, sometimes tortured, imprisoned for perceived wrongdoing at the markets. Women are also those who cross the border into China without government approval, without regime approval, sometimes in search of freedom, as much freedom as there is in China, not much, but things are a bit better. But eventually the goal is to end up in a third country, and then in South Korea or other countries. And of course, they're in search of economic opportunity. We have a very big problem there with China. China is a party to the 1951 Convention concerning the status of refugees in the 1967 additional protocol. These refugees, 80% of them are women. These refugees in China are returned to North Korea, where they're tortured, imprisoned, sometimes killed. We've had terrible reports of forced abortions performed on women, where children of Chinese men infanticide. People of religion are particularly in danger. So they return, and this is very important. According to the 1951 UN Refugee Convention, if they return to a place where they face a fear of persecution, they qualify to have access to the process leading to acquiring political refugee status. As many of the other speakers will address this issue today, there are 2,000 North Korean refugees, at least 2,000 in detention in China, awaiting forcible repatriation now that North Korea is gradually opening its borders post-COVID. There are lots of human rights groups who are doing great work, doing their best to address this issue and prevent the forcible repatriation of these refugees. So
okay. North Korean refugee problem is pretty well covered by international media, but the prison camps called Kwalliso is secretly operated. And do you think we have a good chance to bring the leader to justice, like to the criminal court in Hague? And what's the obstacle we are not able to do it?
This was one of the main recommendations of the February 2014 report of the UN Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in the DPRK, the referral of the North Korean regime and its top leadership to the International Criminal Court. North Korea is not a party to the Rome Statute, the 2002 Rome Statute that established the International Criminal Court. Basically, it would take a referral by the UN Security Council. What is the problem with the UN Security Council? The UN Security Council is deeply divided. There are the status quo powers, the United States, amongst the permanent members of the UN Security Council, the status quo powers, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and then on the other hand, there are the revisionist powers, Russia and China, and we all know the abomination of Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the tremendous human suffering that this invasion has caused in Ukraine. So a veto by a P5 member can block the referral. And it's practically certain that China or Russia would veto the referral of the North Korean case to the International Criminal Court. So, of course, if we look at recent history, there have been special tribunals. For example, ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Rwanda was another precedent. Of course, in each case, it required a resolution of the UN Security Council. So if it's difficult, it doesn't mean that we should give up. Every time, and we should definitely press for the referral, because every time China vetoes an attempt to refer Kim Jong-un to the International Criminal Court, it paints itself into a corner as a P5 member of the UN, a permanent member of the UN Security Council that aids and abets a regime that commits crimes against humanity. I think that the role of civil society is very important. Civil society is very creative. Many of us have tried a lot of different ways and means, mock trials. I think that eventually that creative solution will come from civil society.
Some time ago, the other party, probably from China or Russia, they accuse us that why Security Council handles human rights issues instead of human rights. Why we have a human rights council? What's your comment about that?
There is a security human rights nexus in North Korea. Mm-hmm. North Korea's human rights violations and crimes against humanity constitute a threat to international peace and security, thus falling under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter that deals with threats to international peace and security. All UN Security Council resolutions so far, I'm sorry, this is my fire alarm. Back to your question about the Security Council. Well, the Security Council is not about human rights.
Yeah.
North Korean human rights violations and crimes against humanity constitute a threat to international peace and security. There is a clear security human rights nexus. Why? For two main reasons. Reason number one, in order to procure the resources it needs to develop its nuclear program, the North Korean regime oppresses and exploits its own people at home and abroad. That would be reason number one. Reason number two, what the United States, Canada, the international community want is CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. How can one have CVID if there is no access to the political prison camps? One camp in particular comes to mind, Camp 16, which is very close to the nuclear test facility at Punggye. We're just about to publish a very interesting report. It's ready. I ran the final edits today. You'll see it establishing a connection between the two facilities. So North Korean human rights violations do constitute a threat to international peace and security because they're instrumentalized by the Kim regime to procure the resources it needs to continue developing its nuclear program, and also because since they don't recognize the existence of these scams, there is also the possibility of concealing, for example, equipment. And once again, CVID without access to the camps is impossible. There is a clear security human rights nexus.
Yeah, a very clear explanation. I haven't heard something like this. My next question is about human rights in North Korea Act in the States. What's the official title of the act in the States?
It's the North Korean Human Rights Act. It was
okay. North Korean Human Rights Act.
Yes.
I think the United States earmarks about 24 million a year, I guess. How is the program successful? Is it really successful?
Well, we have one problem here. The act has not been reauthorized. So S4216 was introduced by Congressman Young Kim on the House side and by Senator Marco Rubio on the Senate side. It has not passed so far. It is very unlikely that it will pass by the end of this month. The new reauthorized version would authorize the appropriation of 10 million each year. Initially, it was from 2023 to 2027. We hope the reauthorization will pass. It will probably be 2024 to 2028, 10 million each year for ongoing program managed by the U.S. State Department, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and the U.S. Agency for Global Media to improve access to information in North Korea, promote democracy and human rights, and provide humanitarian assistance to North Korean refugees. What is my assessment of the bill so far? I think that in terms of the refugee element of the North Korean Human Rights Act, we haven't done too well. The number of North Korean refugees who have resettled in the United States requesting asylum is very low, just about 40. In terms of documentation of North Korean human rights abuses supported by the U.S. State Department, the Bureau for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor in particular, and the National Endowment for Democracy, I would assess the record as positive. We know much more about the North Korean human rights situation through the efforts of such organizations. In the information field, of course, there are groups that have been quite successful. There is a North Korean information firewall. Eventually, that information firewall will fall. Things were very difficult under COVID. North Korea cracked down really hard on information coming in from the outside world, those attempting to distribute such information, those attempting to access such information. So a difficult environment. Now with the gradual opening on the border, we'll see what impact that has on information.
So the act in the States is to be reauthorized every 4 or 5 years?
4 years, yes.
Oh, I see. So it hasn't been reauthorized yet this time?
No, not yet. No.
And about the very small number of North Korean refugees in the States. Some said it is due to some security issues on the refugee claimants.
There are many factors at play here. Of course, the U.S., and you're right, the U.S. debriefing process takes longer than the South Korean debriefing process. And on the other hand, throughout their lives, they've been taught that the United States is the greatest enemy of South Korea. It's very difficult to get over that psychological obstacle. In South Korea, the same language is spoken. In South Korea, there are resettlement allowances and vocational training, a lot of facilities. Of course, the system is not perfect. The system is not flawed, but the people and government of South Korea have tried hard to assist North Korean refugees. Again, many of them have had trouble. It's a very different society, after all. And again, the United States is unknown. What does this tell us? It tells us that there is a need for information, enhancing the understanding of the United States and what the United States stands for as we approach North Korean refugees who are in transit in third countries.
Okay. I don't know if you are the right person to be asked about this, but I understand you often visit Seoul as a visiting professor at the
Yes.
Hankuk University. And
Actually, for the past 2 years, I have taught at Yonsei University. Before that,
Yonsei, okay. All right. So you might have chances to look into what's happened and what's still happening inside South Korea. So I want to ask you about North Korean Human Rights Act in South Korea. What happened? Why it is not enacted still?
well, the act itself has been enacted. The problem is the Human Rights Foundation. And because of disagreement between the two sides of the aisle, basically the Human Rights Foundation has not become operational. In order to deal with this issue, the previous unification minister of South Korea, Minister Kwon Young-se, established a human rights promotion committee, constituted of 15 outstanding individuals with knowledge and expertise of North Korean human rights, in order to promote finally promote the operation of the Human Rights Foundation. Basically, it's a matter of disagreement over the board membership of the foundation. So I think that change might come. So basically, this is fundamentally the issue. The two sides are, according to the law, when it comes to the foundation and the board of directors, the unification minister is tasked with nominating 2 candidates for the board of directors. The ruling party and the opposition parties are charged with nominating 5 candidates each. But due to disagreements between the 2 main political parties, no one has been appointed to the foundation's inaugural board in the past 7 years. Okay, if you ask me, do I think there will be some movement and positive change here? I think that the key, I'm not trying to play Korean politics here, but I think that the elections in the spring of next year, in April, will be very important, will be a decisive factor in the operation of the Human Rights Foundation.
Considering what's happening in North Korea, I mean, it would constitute criminal negligence, isn't it? Okay.
It's
Okay,
politics.
another.
Unfortunately, the unfortunate thing is that human rights is being politicized. Human
Yeah,
rights in general and human rights in North Korea should not be politicized in countries that are democracies, such as the United States, Canada, or South Korea.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, finally, about human rights in North Korea Act of Canada, which has been just geared by M94, introduced by Honorable Judith Scrow, who will be with us on the spot in the commemoration in Ottawa. How do you think it will help protect the suffering Korean people and promote freedom, human rights, democracy, and rule of law we all value in the free world?
Canada has been a great champion of human rights in general and human rights in North Korea in particular. I think that the establishment of a Canadian special envoy for North Korean human rights would be a very important step. Coordination will be very important moving ahead. We don't know what will happen in South Korea a couple of years from now. So we have a very narrow window of opportunity to coordinate and address the North Korean human rights policy. I think that the Joe Biden administration in South Korea, the Yoon Suk-yeol government in South Korea, and Prime Minister Kishida in Japan had a very good meeting in Camp David. They did mention human rights. It's not necessarily an area where there is a coherent strategy. So definitely the promoters of North Korean human rights on the international scene and at the UN, the United States, South Korea, the European Union, Canada, Japan, can achieve even better coordination if the Canadian North Korean Human Rights Act is passed, and in particular, if this position is established.
Yeah. Some criticize that the Human Rights Act is, rather than human rights itself, could be used as a political leverage, to pressure North Korea. What do you say about that?
The U.S. North Korean Human Rights Act was passed in 2004. Others, including South Korea, have passed such acts. The North Koreans don't mind it much, I think. Those human rights violations will continue unless this contributes to a coherent human rights upfront policy that elevates human rights to a position comparable to that of political, security, and military issues. For more than 30 years now, human rights has been sacrificed on the altar of political, military, and security issues. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a clear security human rights nexus. Without addressing human rights, resolving the security issues is impossible.
Now time is almost up. Do you have any additional comments you want to make?
Yes, I wish you the best of luck with the conference. I'm very sorry that I cannot be there with you in person, but I know it's going to be a wonderful conference, and I know it's going to make a big difference for the people of North Korea and for the cause of improving the human rights of the North Korean people. Let me convey my best and warmest wishes to you and to all participants.